I'm more aware than I've ever been in my life of what I've got, and I don't want to lose it again.
What? There's somebody in my dressing room that wants a second chance, and he'd love to come on out.
You've got a great career ahead of you.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. But I have to tell you.
Andy Gibb made history as the first solo artist to have his first 3 singles reach #1. He dated Victoria Principal. He co-hosted Solid Gold. By 30, he was dead. The world blamed drugs and a broken heart, but his daughter Peta stayed quiet for nearly 4 decades. She watched the rumors spread. She heard the whispers about suicide, and she said nothing until now. In 2024, she finally broke her silence. What she revealed about her father's final years shocked even those closest to him. This is the story no one was supposed to tell. Andy Gibb entered the world on March 5, 1958, in a quiet hospital in Manchester. And from the beginning, he was surrounded by a family that lived and breathed music. His father had once been a drummer and big band leader, and his mother carried her own mix of Irish and English roots that shaped the warmth in their home. Andy was the youngest of 5, and his 3 older brothers, Barry, Robin, and Maurice, were already forming the bond that would turn them into the Bee Gees. Only 6 months after Andy was born, the whole family packed their hopes onto a ship called the Fair Sea and sailed to Australia in September 1958 under an assisted migration scheme. They started in Redcliffe and then shifted to Crib Island in January 1960. Andy hardly had time to plant his feet anywhere before the family would move again between Brisbane and Sydney. And with every move, he became the new kid trying to understand a new place. Even so, music stayed close because his brothers were already appearing on television and releasing their own early recordings. When Andy turned 8 in January 1967, the family returned to England, and this time the world he stepped into felt bigger and louder. His brothers were becoming international stars, and crowds waited outside their London home every day. Andy tried to adjust to British school life, but it was hard when his classmates thought he had it easy because of his brother's fame, even though the pressure weighed on him more than anyone knew. As the years in Australia faded behind him, those early days settled deep inside Andy. His childhood had been full of moves, new schools, and simple outdoor moments that felt far removed from the rise his brothers were experiencing. Between June and August 1961, the family lived at 244 Nudgee Road in Northgate, and Andy attended Northgate School before another move took them to Surfer's Paradise. Then came Sydney. Each shift meant he had to start over. And while his brothers were building their presence on Australian TV, Andy spent much of his time watching, listening, and wondering where he fit. By the time the family returned to England in 1967, his brothers were stepping into the global spotlight, while he had missed the intense musical shaping they had gone through. This left Andy trying to catch up in a world where fame surrounded him but didn't belong to him yet. Back in England, Andy was only 8 when he found himself living with daily crowds outside their door, and the noise around the Bee Gees made it even harder for him to find his own place. Suggestions that he should join his brothers were pushed away because he was too young and too inexperienced. He also had more than 11 years between him and Barry, and more than 8 between him and Robin and Maurice, which only added to the gap he felt. School brought its own problems. Some classmates treated him differently because of his brother's success, and the teasing felt sharper each time it happened. Even so, he reached for something that felt familiar. At 13, Barry gave him a guitar. It came at the perfect moment. Andy held it the way someone holds a lifeline. He practiced late into the night, not to imitate the Bee Gees, but to feel like he belonged somewhere. The guitar became the thing that centered him and quietly pushed him toward the idea of a future where he could stand on his own. That guitar followed him when he left England for Ibiza in the early 1970s. At just 14 in 1972, he was already performing in tourist clubs where the nights were loud and the crowds unpredictable. Those clubs gave him room to experiment and stumble and grow without the weight of his family name pressing down on him. He played pop songs, his own early ideas, whatever the audience wanted. He worked through long nights, learning how to hold attention, how to loosen up, and how to make a room feel close. By the time 1973 ended, he had a small following and a clearer sense of who he wanted to become. Those years in Ibiza shaped him in ways nothing else could, strengthening the belief that he didn't have to ride on the success of his brothers. He could make his own path. In 1974, when he was 15, he chose another fresh start and moved to Sydney to live with his sister Leslie. The moment he arrived, he felt something bright inside him. He later said Sydney was his spiritual home because it carried warmth, freedom, and a sense of possibility that he hadn't felt before. He lived simply, shared small apartments, and spent his days writing songs and playing in local clubs. The city gave him space to breathe and grow. The Australian music scene was lively and full of energy, and Andy found himself naturally drawn to it. Here, he wasn't the youngest Gibb or the kid watching from behind his famous brothers. He was Andy, a young artist finding his place. With time, the club circuit opened even more doors. Cole Joy, one of Australia's early rock and roll pioneers, noticed Andy's potential and took him under his wing. From 1974 to 1976, Andy performed throughout Sydney, playing at hotels and clubs with his first group called Melody Fair. The band included Isle of Man musicians John Alderson and John Stringer, and they brought Andy into long nights of music, crowds, and constant learning. In November 1974, he recorded 6 demos with Cole Joy, including tracks like Words and Music, Westfield Mansions, and Flowing Rivers. These songs carried the first real pieces of Andy's identity as an artist. They weren't just attempts at music. They were declarations that he had something of his own to offer. Even while the Bee Gees were dominating charts internationally, Andy stayed grounded in small venues with little pay, learning how to win over audiences without relying on his last name. At 16, his work reached a new level when he wrote Words and Music. It became his first commercial single, released in late 1975 in Australia and New Zealand. It wasn't a huge hit, but it was enough to prove that Andy could write, create, and build something without being compared to Barry, Robin, and Maurice at every turn. The song helped him develop confidence, and it marked the beginning of a new chapter in his musical journey. The pieces were falling into place. Andy was ready for something bigger. That moment arrived in June 1976, when Barry called and urged him to move to Miami. Andy didn't hesitate much. At 18, he made a quick decision and married Kim Reeder on July 11, 1976, at Wayside Chapel in Sydney. Their honeymoon took them to Robert Stigwood's house in Bermuda, where Barry joined them to start shaping Andy's debut album. By September 1976, Andy and Kim landed in Miami, stepping directly into the creative world that surrounded the Bee Gees. Criteria Studios was buzzing with energy, especially since the Eagles were there finishing Hotel California. Andy walked into that studio and instantly felt the weight and excitement of being in a place where musical history was being made. The recording of Flowing Rivers began around October 1976. Andy poured himself into the sessions, recording songs he had written during his time in Australia. Joe Walsh even played on 2 tracks. Barry only produced 2 songs, but guided the album as executive producer, while Albie Galutin and Carl Richardson shaped the overall sound. The album was completed in just a few weeks, full of live band takes, strings, and horns that gave it a warm, full feel. When Flowing Rivers came out in September 1977, it reached the top 20 on Billboard's Top 200 and sold over 1 million copies. For a debut artist, this was almost unbelievable. Success arrived like a sudden wave. His first single, I Just Want to Be Your Everything, reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 on July 30, 1977, and stayed there for 4 weeks. Andy was only 19, making him the youngest solo male artist to reach that spot. His second single, Love is Thicker Than Water, also hit #1 in March 1978, and on March 4, 1978, It replaced his brother's Stayin' Alive at the top. For a moment, the entire Gibb family stood at the peak of pop music together. Andy had achieved something rare. His rise was fast, bright, and historic. And even though it placed heavy expectations on his shoulders, it also proved he was more than just the youngest Gibb. Andy Gibb walked into the winter of 1977 with something to prove. And once he stepped into those studios in Los Angeles and Miami, everything started moving in a rhythm that pulled him along. He began recording his second album, Shadow Dancing, that December, and wrapped it by February 1978, working with the same team that had shaped his first success. Barry Gibb, Albee Gallatin, and Carl Richardson were always somewhere close, either in the control room or slipping in from nearby movie sets, where the Bee Gees were shooting scenes for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Wally Heider's studios in Los Angeles carried one part of the sound, and Criteria Studios in Miami carried the other, and the two spaces blended into one long creative stretch. Producer Carl Richardson later said their band was so tight, they jokingly called it the Andy Gibb Hit Orchestra. Harold Cowart held down the bass, Ron Ziegler kept the drums steady, and Joey Murcia handled the guitar work with the calm of someone who had done it thousands of times. Barry would escape the movie set whenever he could, and Albee often worked until the sun hinted at morning. The Atlantic Records rhythm section gave the music a soulful heartbeat. Everything was built piece by piece, switching cities, switching studios, and finding that Miami Beach disco groove that made the album feel alive. When the title track finally came out in April 1978, it didn't take long for the world to react. Shadow Dancing shot up the Billboard Hot 100 and landed at #1 on June 17, 1978. Then it stayed there for 7 straight weeks. It became the biggest single of 1978. It sold more than 2.5 million copies in the United States. And Andy Gibb, at only 20 years old, became the first solo artist ever to have his first 3 singles reach #1. The success was so overwhelming it even passed the Bee Gees' own hits from that same year, beating Stayin' Alive and Night Fever on the year-end chart. Suddenly, he wasn't just a young singer with a famous family. He was a star in his own right, and his name was everywhere. The album moved right along with him. Shadow Dancing climbed to #7 on the Billboard 200 in the United States, and did just as well in Canada. It even became the only one of his albums to chart in the United Kingdom. Sales pushed it into multi-platinum territory, and 2 more singles broke into the top 10. An Everlasting Love reached #5, and Our Love Don't Throw It All Away reached #9. Teen magazines splashed his face across their covers. His name was repeated in households across America. Managers and publicists shaped his image with care, making sure he always looked polished, warm, and ready. But carrying that image came with a cost. The pressure grew heavier, and the spotlight followed him everywhere, even when he didn't feel steady underneath it. Before all this fame, his life had shifted in ways few people truly understood. Andy married Kim Reeder in Sydney on July 11, 1976, when she was 18, and he was preparing for a career that would soon explode. Their daughter, Peta J., was born on January 25, 1978, right as Andy was reaching the height of his success. The timing made everything harder. He never found enough space to be fully present for her. Kim later said cocaine became Andy's first love. It made him paranoid and distant, and their marriage fell apart. They divorced on January 15, 1978, only 10 days before Peta was born. Reporters painted Kim as someone chasing money, but she said it was never about cash. She moved back to Australia, and the distance between Andy and his child grew into something that stayed heavy for years. Not long after, Andy stepped into another relationship that would stir even more attention. In 1978, he began dating Marie Osmond. Producer Albee Gallatin said from the start that it looked impossible because Andy was deep into drugs, and Marie didn't even drink soda. Her family didn't approve, and things worsened when Andy flooded Marie with obsessive late-night phone calls. Her family eventually stepped in and took legal action to stop him from calling. Marie later admitted she regretted ending things with a blunt phone message. She told him they were done, and that moment hit him like a wall he couldn't climb. For her, the relationship was slipping away. For him, it became another wound he didn't know how to close. She spoke years later about how she feared losing herself if she kept trying to save him. And even now, she remembers him with sadness and respect. Then came Victoria Principal. They met in 1981 on The John Davidson Show. She was 31 and already a star on Dallas. And Andy was 23 with a smile that still lit up rooms. They looked perfect together in photos. And for 13 months, they became one of Hollywood's brightest couples. But underneath the surface, Andy's addiction was growing. Victoria held on as long as she could, but she wanted him to choose sobriety, and he couldn't. She gave him a choice between her and drugs. He chose the drugs. It broke both of them. She said she couldn't give up her own life for his addiction, no matter how much she cared for him. Their duet, All I Have to Do Is Dream, came out during this time, and it became his final single. It reached number 51. That number stayed with him. So did the heartbreak. By the time Andy finished his third album, After Dark, in 1980, the struggle was already visible. Producers noticed the signs. He was sinking faster. The addiction pulled at everything he tried to do, and his performances grew uneven. The album didn't match the success of his early work. That alone might have been manageable, but the addiction started costing him jobs. Roles in The Pirates of Penzance and Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat slipped away. He lost hosting opportunities on Solid Gold. The ultimatum from Victoria hit in the middle of this storm. The album's weak performance felt like another door closing, and each closed door made him turn further inward. The end of the relationship in March 1982 pushed him into a deeper collapse. It happened just days before his 24th birthday. Victoria told him she did not want to marry him, no matter how much he had hoped for a future together. When he failed to choose sobriety, she stepped away for good. Andy never recovered from that moment. He blamed her for his downfall in interviews, convinced the breakup had broken something inside him. Her decision marked the beginning of a decline that no one around him could ignore. After the breakup, everything spiraled. Andy told People magazine he fell apart and didn't care about anything. He turned to cocaine around the clock and spent about $1,000 a day, which today would be more than $3,000. The drug took over every part of his life. He stayed awake for 2 straight weeks and refused to leave his room as messages piled up from producers who were trying desperately to get him back on track. His hospital visits grew more frequent because his chest and stomach pains became severe. People inside the industry whispered about it, and soon no one could hide how far he was slipping. The emotional collapse hit just as hard. He skipped major shows, including the American Music Awards, simply because he was too broken to walk out the door. His absence became a pattern. He missed rehearsals and performances for Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and he was eventually fired. Solid Gold let him go for the same reason. Broadway producer Zev Buffman said Andy was wonderful when he showed up, but the problem was that he rarely showed up at all. His talent was still there, but his addiction took every ounce of stability he had left. Andy Gibb stepped into Solid Gold in 1981, thinking it would be the fresh start he needed. The show was popular. Marilyn McCoo was already a trusted presence, and audiences still remembered Andy as the young star with the golden voice. For a moment, it felt like a chance to rise again. But as the months rolled forward, something darker kept pulling him away. By the spring of 1982, he had missed too many tapings, and each absence chipped away at the patience of producers who kept hoping he would show up. His addiction had become stronger than his schedule. In later interviews, he admitted he was doing an awful lot of cocaine, and he simply did not care about responsibilities anymore. Fans waited, colleagues covered for him, and executives finally realized they had no choice. He was let go, and the firing became the first major public crack in the image he had built. It hurt his career in ways that echoed for years. Right after this, he tried to climb back with Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. In 1982, it was a big Broadway opportunity, and one that could have changed everything for him. For a little while, people believed it might actually work, but the pattern from Solid Gold followed him. Within 6 weeks, he missed 12 performances. The understudy stepped in so often that producers Zev Buffman and Susan Ross had to confront him. He begged them not to fire him and promised he would fix everything. Then he missed another show. That one absence ended it. He was asked to leave, and the door closed on another chance that slipped through his hands. His family could only watch as he kept falling, unable to stop himself even when he knew what was happening. It did not end there. Andy moved to the Los Angeles production of The Pirates of Penzance, hoping this one would be different, but the same struggle followed him into rehearsals. The missed performances kept adding up, and by the time the show went on the road, he stayed behind. Producers said his attendance made it impossible to rely on him. This was now the third major project, lost to the same problem. Industry insiders began whispering that he could not be trusted. His family saw the pain behind those whispers, and even though they tried to help, they also understood how helpless he felt inside his own addiction. As his work faded, something even more painful happened. His voice, the very thing that carried him into fame, began to break down. Years of drug use damaged his vocal cords. His once smooth tone turned uneven and tired. People close to him noticed it. His brothers Barry, Robin, and Maurice tried to reach him, but the strain between them grew. They loved him, but every relapse, every missed call, and every broken promise placed another weight on their hearts. Marie Osmond later shared that she had to take legal action to stop the Bee Gees from helping him financially because she believed they were unknowingly enabling him. It showed how tangled his life had become, with everyone trying in their own way to save him while watching him slip further away. By 1985, his family pushed him to get help at the Betty Ford Clinic. It was one of the best addiction centers in the country. He stayed for 6 weeks, surrounded by therapy and structure, and for a moment, there was hope. He walked out, trying to believe he could start over, but addiction did not loosen its grip. He relapsed again, pulled back by depression and self-hatred that he never fully understood himself. The clinic had a strong recovery rate, yet he was among the many who struggled once they left its doors. His family felt the weight of that loss because they knew how much he needed this one victory. Alongside the emotional damage came the financial collapse. In the late 1970s, he earned millions. He was making $50,000 a show and more than $3 million from shadow dancing alone. But cocaine ate through his money as fast as it ate through his health. By 1985, his income dropped to $24,127. In 1986, it collapsed further to $7,755. Bills piled up, opportunities shrank, and by September 1987, he filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The numbers were shocking. His assets added up to $1,432.79. His debts were more than $1 million before later amendments brought them to $187,641. He lived rent-free in a Florida penthouse with furniture borrowed from his brothers. Fame had turned into a memory, and the fall left him exposed and fragile. His bankruptcy filing told the full story. On September 10, 1987, the papers showed over $1 million in personal and business debts. The law firm Loeb & Loeb alone was owed $3,909.94. Business Jet Airlines appeared on the list with $23,253.59. There were medical bills, IRS issues, and fees from accounting firms. His assets were so small that he was allowed to keep only $1,000 in personal property. Even his management company was included in the filing, with debts of $46,289 and just $236 in assets. He had nothing left. His daughter received no financial security from the man who once topped the charts. As the years closed in on him, he tried one more comeback. In January 1988, He traveled to England because Island Records was ready to give him another chance. Barry helped arrange it. All Andy had to do was show up and sign the contract. But when he arrived, anxiety took over. He missed meeting after meeting and started believing he had nothing left to give. The contract was never signed, the album never started, and his confidence slipped further. He did record a few sessions at Mayfair Studios in the spring of 1988, but his addiction and fear were stronger than his plans. Barry and Maurice tried to keep him steady through phone calls, urging him to stay clean. Each missed opportunity felt heavier because everyone knew this might have been the last chance he would ever get. Yet through all that chaos, Andy was still dreaming in small, private ways. In 1987, he quietly earned a pilot's license. Almost no one knew about it at the time. It surprised people later, because it showed he still wanted a future that went beyond music. He talked to friends about flying, and even about joining the Bee Gees for their 1989 album. Barry mentioned in interviews that Andy had a quiet determination that people rarely saw. The license became a hidden piece of hope, a sign that he had not given up on life, even when it felt darkest around him. Everything crashed in March 1988. After his 30th birthday on March 5th, he began feeling worse. He had checked himself into a hospital weeks earlier, but left too soon. On March 7th, he walked into John Radcliffe Hospital in Oxford with severe chest pains. Doctors wanted more tests, but before they could proceed, he collapsed on March 10th and never recovered. The cause was myocarditis, an inflamed heart muscle that had been weakened for years by substance abuse. His cardiologist, William Schell, explained that his heart simply could not fight anymore. He had been sober for more than a year, but the damage from earlier years was permanent. Fans were shocked because he had been working on new music. His family felt the loss like a final blow, because they believed he was close to turning a corner. 5 days after turning 30, Andy Gibb was gone. His death came after 3 hospital visits in a matter of weeks. On the night of March 9th, he collapsed at his brother Robin's estate before being rushed to the hospital. When the news broke, people around the world struggled to understand how someone so young and talented could fade so fast. He had been sober, he had been trying, but his body could not undo the years of strain. The story did not end with his death. He had one daughter, Peta, who was just 10 when he passed. Because he left no will, she inherited nothing. For most of her childhood, she knew her father mostly as a distant voice on the phone, and a man who came and went from her life in short visits. Over the years, rumors swirled that Andy had taken his own life, but they were not true. In 2024, Peta spoke publicly for the first time. She said her father did not die from heart disease alone. She said he died because he hated himself. Her words shifted the way people understood his story. She showed that behind every headline, there was a man crushed by his own pain. In January 2024, she launched the official Andy Gibb website. She called it a labor of love and filled it with photos and memories the world had never seen. For the first time, she took control of his story. The Gibb family supported the project, and fans embraced it. Her work brought Andy's name back into the light, not as a tragic figure, but as someone who loved deeply, dreamed constantly, and struggled in silence.